1,000. I'm off my soapbox. It's Monday's political panel. We welcome my favourite, I have to say, is my favourite, Mike Buckley, journalist and campaigner. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Good afternoon, very well. How are you?
I've missed you, dear boy. You make me laugh. Also, Albie Amankona, political commentator and founder of Conservatives Against Racism. Albie, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon, Jeremy. All the better for seeing you.
What a lovely man you are. The breaking news in the last hour, Rwanda asylum plan. The injunction was not granted. The court allows the first flight to go ahead. It will go on Tuesday. Appeal judges have agreed. It follows the previous decision by the High Court that it was in the public interest for the government to carry out its policies. Under the scheme, some of those entering the UK illegally will be flown to Rwanda to apply for asylum there. Campaigners are trying to stop people being sent to the East African country before a full hearing on the policy is lawful next month. 11 were due on that flight. Mike, I know that you and I could share a drink, share dinner, would not always agree, which is the essence of a democracy, etc., etc. If I try a different way, there is a massive, massive feeling amongst people in this country that this is a situation that needs dealing with. And one of the things that we hear day in, day out on this station is that there doesn't seem to be any differentiation in the people who oppose the Rwanda scheme, whether it's right or not, between a refugee and an illegal immigrant. You heard me say what I said about Ukraine. People were willing to do so much. It is wrong when human traffickers bring young men over here who destroy their papers and take from a country that's on its knees, isn't it?
Well, I don't really know what you mean by illegal immigrant. I mean, the people coming across these small boats are people seeking asylum. It's the legal norm under international law for people to be able to do that. And the states receiving those people, in this case the UK, should have a system where it assesses those people and works out, are these people genuine asylum seekers, in which case we need to give them asylum and let them stay until it becomes, safe for them to go home, or are they not actually asylum seekers, in which case they need to go back to their point of origin. And we know, because the stats are available, about 75% of people who come to the UK to claim asylum are successfully making their claim, and 25% are not. And presumably those people are returned home. I would imagine most of them are, even though I realise for some people that can take some time because the countries that they go back to often actually are very unsafe places. So what's happening at the moment is the government is basically failing to do its duty to those people and actually failing to do the job that we elected them to do, which is to put in place an asylum system that works. And they're attempting to kind of offshore that responsibility to Rwanda, which is not something that I would expect our government to do. It isn't something that a rich, capable nation such as ours should do.
But we're not, with the greatest respect. You can't say we're a rich nation when you look at the untold misery, the length and breadth of this country right now, mate. You can't.
We're the fifth or sixth richest country in the world. There's loads of money in our country. It's just loads of it is in the wrong pockets. We're more than capable of housing people and taking care of people at the bottom of the pile. We're more than capable of doing that for British people, but we're not, because we've got a government that isn't interested in doing that. And we're more than capable of doing that for people who come to the UK because they're seeking asylum. We're taking in about 300,000 people. I think those are the estimates from Hong Kong.
Yeah.
I have no problem with that. We're taking in about 150,000 people from Ukraine. Great. I have no problem with that. It's the right thing to do. We've had about 10,000 people come across so far on small boats from France. They're only doing that because there's no safe and legal route. They could get a ferry or get a plane to come to the UK.
But Mike, let me read this. Once the bogus asylum seekers and economic migrants realise they're not getting on the British taxpayer-funded gravy train but will be taken to Rwanda for processing, I suspect they'll remain perfectly in unwar-torn and civilised and safe France. That's what people think, mate.
Most people who come to the UK, as I've already said, 75% of them are deemed to be actual asylum seekers who deserve to be given asylum. And that's the government's own process that determines.
So what about the other 25%? If they've got family here, why don't they go and live at the family? We're paying £5 million a year, Albie, £5 million a day, Albie, aren't we, to put these people in hotels? I'm not actually, and I'm with my... I hate the passage across that thing. I think it's absolutely appalling. But I do think there comes a point, however unpopular it is, where you have to, and Mike will hate this, you have to look after your own. And right now, I think we have to look after our own, don't we?
I think, Jeremy, we're slightly missing the point of what this policy is for. The point of this policy is that it is a deterrent. Now, instinctively, when I first heard about this policy, I did think it sounded rather hardline and quite expensive. But without being able to hold talks with the French successfully to open these safe and legal routes that we actually need, I can understand why the government's done it. This is something which Conservative voters care about. This is something which comes up in MPs' inboxes all the time. And there are thousands of people risking their lives crossing the Channel in boats for whatever reason. And it is right that the government tries to break that business model. Now, is this the right way to break it? That's the question we should be having. And I think the efficacy of this deterrent is yet to be proven. Some may argue that because the boats are still coming over that it's not working. But actually, I think we'll have to wait and see how effective the policy is at deterring people before writing it off. And we're not getting any ideas from the left about what deterrents could be. So if not this, what?
Let me read this to you both. Why do these lefty lawyers say it's not illegal to enter the UK, Mike, if seeking asylum? Surely you need documents to enter a country, and if you have none, you can't come in. I'm sure that my turning up in the US or Australia or any other country would have me nicked if I didn't have the right papers.
Of course not. I mean, if you imagine you have fled a war zone. Say you fled.
But France isn't a war zone, Mike.
No, it isn't. But the people who are seeking asylum here are not French, are they?
But they're not English either, are they?
You get on the Eurostar. If you're seeking asylum, by definition, you've come from somewhere that is war-torn.
But why? My argument is, Mike, which nobody.
You don't have all your documents in an Ziploc folder.
But Mike, my argument is this: absolutely, if you are leaving a war-torn country, okay. Is this the first safe country in the world, then? What about, shouldn't they stop in the first safe country? I'm just asking somebody to acknowledge that it always seems to be Great Britain.
It isn't always Great Britain, and you're assuming that everybody ends up in Britain where they don't. I mean, look at Lebanon, for example. Lebanon is genuinely a poor country and is suffering, an extreme crisis in its economy, but I think they've got 1.5 million Syrians in there who fled the war. I think 1 in 3 people living in Lebanon is a Syrian refugee. The Lebanese people are dealing with it. I mean, imagine that. There'd be that would mean 20 million people coming to the UK with the Syrians and Ukrainians to seek asylum, and us all dealing with it and being fine with it. We're not even remotely close to that. I mean, that would be a genuine asylum seeker crisis.
How do you answer the people who would say, and you've heard, because you've shared this station with me for a while, the people who are really, really struggling with this cost of living crisis bites, massive inflation increases, food, cost of everything, petrol, ridiculous. Do you understand, Mike, just acknowledge that there are a lot of people who will say, sorry, we need looking after first and foremost. Is that an appalling thing to say, or do you understand it?
We're talking about 2 different areas of government failure. The government have failed to establish an effective asylum seeker system, and they have failed to manage the economy and public services in a way that caters for people at the bottom of the pile who are struggling in this country. The government have failed twice. Just sending people to Rwanda doesn't make anybody in the UK or anybody British better off, does it? Not a single person. And in fact, it costs millions, absolutely millions. That money, instead of being given to Rwanda and spent on near-empty flights, contributing to carbon emissions, could be spent on people at the bottom of the pile. It could put benefits up. It could get somebody into a job. It could put someone on a training scheme. It could send somebody through university. There's loads of things that money could do, but it's not. It's being wasted.
Albie?
Mike, with the greatest respect, I don't think it's fair to say that the UK's record on taking refugees under a Conservative government is a complete failure. You, in fact, actually acknowledged some of the successes earlier: Ukraine, Syria, Afghanistan, Hong Kong, these huge schemes. The problem is, what we need to do is work hard to open safe and legal routes with our European partners. But the Europeans just aren't willing to play ball. Now, some of that might come from Brexit, but ultimately we cannot solve this problem without our European partners' cooperation. So I come back to my last question, which is after the first time I spoke, which is, if we're not going to use this as a deterrent, what should we be doing to deter migrants from crossing the Channel?
Yeah, what would you do, Mike?
It's not up to the Europeans to decide whether we have a system that enables migrants to come to the UK on a ferry.
But if they're coming from France, then surely we need to cooperate with our French partners.
Coming anywhere else. We could negotiate that with France if we wanted to. They'd be perfectly happy to do it. We used to be in a system called the Dublin system that allowed us to return migrants to France or another European country if it was deemed appropriate that be the place that they apply for asylum. We left that when we left the EU. We didn't have to. We chose to. Priti Patel has created her own problem. She's the one that every time you hear her pretty much talking about this, she says, our asylum system is broken. Well, who broke
Much to talk, Mike, much to talk about. Can I just put this to you? What Mike negates to say is the reason 75% are deemed legal is because we take so long to process them. Ah, somebody's just moved it. Oh, good Lord, sorry. We take so long to process them because of pro bono lawyers fighting their case. Mike is a typical champagne socialist. Your response, my friend?
I'm not a champagne socialist. I'm never going near this stuff. And you don't get loads of pro bono lawyers. I mean, lawyers, lawyers have to make an income. Some lawyers do work on this stuff, and I'm sure some of them do it for free, and that's very good of them, and they do it out of the goodness of their hearts. And we should all be respectful of people who are using
Simon
this.
Fisher says, why does Mike Buckley insist that all those that rock up at Dover are fleeing war zones? We've seen what people fleeing war zone look like in the last 3 months. Those at Dover don't look anything like those that flee from Ukraine and end up in my house, Mr. Buckley. That's what that one said.
Who, honest, genuinely, I mean, who are they to judge? Who are they to judge what somebody fleeing from a war zone looks like?
But you can't, Mike, you can't have it both ways. Who are you to judge that everybody who arrives here on a dinghy is, in fact, a refugee, trying to escape a war-torn area?
I'm not judging it.
There will be people who are taking the PISS out of a weak system in this country, and I guess whether I support Rwanda or not, I think, genuinely, we've got more to come, but I think we've got finally a government who are saying we are trying to do something. It's being knocked down. Listen, don't go anywhere. Love you both. Coming right back. Talk TV Drive. 5:20 live across the UK, the political panel for Monday. Mike Buckley, Albie Amankona. So, Mike, you'll love this. Well, you both will. Don't look smug, Buckley. In 2021, France took 54,094 immigrants. We took 13,210. France is 2.3 times bigger than us. Here's what I want to say. The argument we're having is that genuine refugees will come here, but we're sending them to Rwanda to have their claims processed, and if they're genuine, they'll come back here. Your argument is we should have sorted this out sooner. You do not, I want to qualify this, think that people that do not have the right paperwork or have destroyed their paperwork or are trying to get a leg up, you don't think these people should be allowed into the United Kingdom?
No, we should assess people and determine whether they're real asylum seekers. If they're not, they should be returned home. The end. It shouldn't be a free-for-all. There should be a system. There should be confidence in the system. The Home Office should create confidence in the system by saying it's a system that works, rather than, as Prickbit tells us all the time, tell us the system's broken. If it's broken, then fix it. That's their responsibility. They're in government. But no, only genuine asylum seekers should be here. Anybody else should be returned to where they came from.
It's interesting, you think whether if we put them in hotels, I wonder if we took an extra 30,000 illegal immigrants and put them down on the beaches in tents, as the French do, what we'd be called. I think that's a relevant point. Can we move on to Sir Keir Starmer, Albie? Today, Parliament Standards Commissioner has admitted that he's investigating whether the Labour leader broke the rules by being late in registering earnings and gifts. We've had much said about trust in politicians, certainly starting with Johnson. Mike's going to tell me this is people tit for tat. So Starmer's got Durham hanging over him, and now he's got this. What do you make of today's news about the Labour leader?
I think overall it's a really bad situation for trust in our political leaders, and overall I'm just disappointed at the current state of play for both leaders of major political parties. Now, I do think we are talking about two different orders of magnitude here, but nonetheless the difficulty for Keir Starmer is that he's painted himself as an anti-Boris, the good, honest lawyer who never puts a foot wrong. But the problem is, when he does put a foot wrong, even on relatively minor things like we've seen with Beer Gate or missing these deadlines to declare earnings, which Boris is guilty of too, by the way, in 2018 and 2019, it's very easy to criticise Starmer because of the positions that he's taken. Whereas if he just focused on the policies and the good policies that Labour could put in place if they were in government to counter whatever they dislike about the Tories, then I think he'd probably be in a better position than he's currently in, but he's not. He's focused on the fact that he's a good, honest lawyer. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like that's totally true. It's
probably quite true, that, Mike, isn't it? I keep saying I want to hear more about policy from Labour and less about it's just Boris Johnson being a this, that and the other. And now it's come back to bite him, hasn't it?
Well, I mean, I hear that from a lot of people. Actually, I hear a lot of people saying, well, fine, we decided we don't want this government anymore. We decided that Boris Johnson shouldn't be the current leader in the country anymore. But what would the world look like under a Labour government? Where does Labour want to take the country? And I agree. I think that's what Labour needs to be talking about. I mean, this story with the money, it's a non-story. But if Keir was setting out, this is what the economy will look like, this is how I'll create jobs, this is how we'll fix climate change, this is what our relationship with Europe will look like. If he was talking about all of that, people wouldn't have time to talk about whether he's filed his admin or whether he hasn't. And that's all that this is about.
And I think Albie's right. If you make your argument just about personality and you know, trust and decency and integrity, and you get caught even minimally with your trousers down, then you're going to be cast in exactly the same way. Talking of which, and I wanted your opinion, both of you, on this. Grant Shapps today plans to ban overtime for striking rail staff. He's made comments about, I'll get agency workers in. Last week I had a couple of people from the RMT and ASLEF on. It's really interesting. I wanted to ask you this because I can see further trouble ahead for Starmer. Mike's going to hate me. Wes Streeting, who I like very much, and Lisa Nandy, both of whom, by the way, would certainly be standing if Starmer goes, have come out in support of strikes that are to disrupt, cripple the United Kingdom, another hot potato. And this is why I like Mike Buckley, because he does come on this station. It's not great, ASLEF, if you're honest. He didn't like what I said, but if you're a train driver on 55 to 59 grand, which is the average, doesn't look great at the moment, does it, when you're holding the country to ransom? You're going to tell me I'm talking rubbish. But I think it's interesting. Starmer hasn't come out either way. Sat a bit on the fence, which is quite typical of him, isn't it, to be fair?
I don't like the strikes. The strikes are happening at all, and I much would rather they were. And it makes my life personally quite difficult because of the stuff I've got to do that week. But we need to take a step back. How have things got to this position? Things have got to this position because the government has allowed them to. The government should have negotiated with those unions, and the government should not be trying to restrict services at a time of growth in rail use. I spoke to ASLEF and RMT last week, actually, and they were saying that the government, in their view, the government is trying to enforceably, push the railways into a period of managed decline, which is the wrong thing. When we want to get people out of their cars and reduce carbon emissions, the government should be investing in the rail network. And the unions are also very concerned that lots of people are going to lose their jobs. I don't want that to happen. And I also want the railways to be invested in so that they're there for everybody to use. So there is a big problem. The government have created the problem. I don't like the strikes as a way to fix the problem. I don't think the strikes will fix the problem, actually. I think they're much more likely to make it worse. But I do understand that the unions don't feel they've got another choice.
Albie?
I think Mike's absolutely wrong to say this government isn't investing in the railways. I mean, have you heard of something called the Integrated Rail Plan, where the government's literally investing almost £100 billion into our railways, the biggest investment since the Victorian era? High Speed 2, for example, all of the expansion of transport that we see in the south in particular. I want to see more of that in the north. But I think the Transport Secretary, in my opinion, is absolutely right to seek to prevent striking workers from claiming overtime. I think it's good that he's looking to remove the legal restriction on employers from taking on agency workers to do cover work done by striking staff. But these are very highly trained staff, so actually that's quite difficult. We cannot be held to ransom every time that the government wants to modernise the railways, and then the RMT and ASLEF want to go on strikes to stop the innovations and the changes that are going to be made to make the railways more effective.
Very quickly, a couple of minutes, guys, a minute each. Some primary school pupils reported today unable to say their names. I think I might find myself siding absolutely with everybody on this. How disgusting. What does that say about our education system? Sorry. Or is it parental at home as well? I don't know. Mike?
It's another example of government failure. I mean, that's the end of it. I mean, when Labour was a government, we had sure start centres that provided places where parents...
Do you blame the government for everything, Mr Buckley? Do you blame the government for everything?
What, can you think of another developed country where kids get to 5 years old and they can't say their own name? Because I can't.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. I am absolutely with you on that. But I do believe, and I'm not just saying it because I've got more kids than Boris Johnson. I do believe genuinely more parents should bear responsibility starting at home. I do believe that. I'm not saying, but I don't believe the family unit and the involvement is as great as it was in the olden days, he says, before he gets laughed at. Albie?
I think that's totally right, Jeremy. Look, I was really sad when I first read the story in the Times earlier today because I'm not actually sure how we got to this point. You know, we need to have a national conversation about what is expected of the state and what is expected of parents. This isn't simply a state thing.
Well, Albie, why? If you arrive at school and you can't speak. It's not the government's fault. You haven't been to school yet, have you?
Exactly. So I think we need to establish what children need to do by the time they go to reception. They should be potty trained. They should be able to hold a pen reasonably, say their names, eat with a knife and fork in a somewhat effective way, and turn the page of a book. And I actually don't think this is a class issue. I'm from a single-parent household. I grew up in social housing, and I confirmed with my mother I could do all of those things. So this might sound uncompassionate, but parents need to step up and do the right thing by their children and give them the basic skills needed to start school.
I could talk to you two all night. Mike Buckley, you're a legend. Albie, thank you both very much indeed. The political panel, that is it for Monday.